What's up, guys? Another retro fight book classic, the Sicilian Blade. The Art of Sicilian Stilleto Fighting by Vito Quattrocchi. The pre-internet days, like I mentioned, Lupanics, Paladin Press, which is how I met my brother James LaFon, Desert Publications. They put out like all kinds of stuff like that was like unsavory, sort of right-wing, libertarian leaning kind of malicious stuff. You see like German MG-34 machine gun manual, poor man's nuclear bomb. Wow, what the hell? What the hell is that? IRA handbook. This kind of stuff. When I was younger, it was like wow, this is edgy stuff, like forbidden things. How much of this stuff was true or not is you can always wonder. But this book in particular, I kind of dig it because in a lot of ways it's as much as an instructional for essentially fencing with a stiletto. It's a look at the old masculine Sicilian culture by this guy here, Vito. Kind of looks like my dad back then. I believe he's grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey, North Jersey, and some pretty nasty anecdotes at the end from back in the home country, Sicily. It sort of has that effect that me and Arkham Reporter mentioned about like small, like this DIY stuff, black metal, real low budget horror films, self-published or in this case, small press books like this. Stuff that's you would never get in the mainstream and done for not a lot of money. Obviously, he probably drew this himself or had a friend draw it, the instructional part here. But it's just there's something about it that's just it's more appealing. It's also not being super long. It's just I don't know. It gives you that this is a cool thing I read. Okay? Starts out where he describes the old Sicilian culture. And there's some things in here that I really like. Talks about the history. Of course, stiletto is Italian for knitting needle, but the Sicilians have a different dialect. They actually call it the muletto, but everybody knows the stiletto. And of course, the original stilettos were fixed blades. This is the modern one. It's a locking blade. It's a folding knife. Right? And stuff like just right off the bat. I'll read this. Being Sicilian by birth, I was brought up in the strictest of my old world tradition, which is to say the old traditions of all our European ancestors, and obviously not just Europeans, but we were taught tradition, we were taught from the earliest youth. The code of honor and manhood, never to accept any insult to oneself or one's family. To do so would bring dishonor on your manhood and shame to your family. This is the ancient world view of it, okay? As the old Sicilian proverb goes, the strength of the family is its sons, and the strength of the son is his family. Right? You understand family is important. It's the most important thing in the world. Okay, and when you don't have one, or you have one that's destroyed, okay, it makes things really hard. We'll just leave it at that. A Sicilian man's entire self-value and worth is tied up in his family. How respected his family is reflects on him, and how respected he is reflects on his family. Right? So little anecdotes like that, especially now when I'm older, kind of really bring it home to me. Right. The island never lost its medieval way of thinking. A man must protect himself and his possessions by his own personal influence and courage, okay, regardless of the law's authority. Oh, it's just possessions. It's just material possessions. It's the principle, right? It's not what it is that you lose or is taken or messed with. It's the fact that it's being done. Like here it describes, the Sicilian man must be respected and revered, just as we can, is generous to his friends and close relations. He is fiercely attached to his family and children, and scowls at the mention of divorce. As a public figure, he must stand for order. He is deeply religious, or at least pretends to be, and extremely conservative. Right? When it comes down to it, we're going to have the stiletto duel. Now, of course, in terms of, this is a book about dueling and also self-defense with the blade. Right? He brings up the whole thing. Right? It has to be done with panache. Right? It has to be publicized, but also remember, it's against the law, so you got to watch out for the pigs. You know. And that's what's his name, eyeball to eyeball, right? 4 eyes, right? Quattrocchi, right? Um, right. And Sicilians, unlike Italians, or in any case, people of a few words. I'll tell you, I'm half Italian, and I was reminded of that frequently where I grew up by the full-blooded Italians. But they would always tell me, "Oh, Sicilians, you can't trust Sicilians." Every Sicilian I met was cool as hell. You know? Just say it. So I'm not saying there weren't bad ones, but the ones I met were pretty cool. Right. Like here, among themselves, they have their own dialect made of half words with diverse meanings. One word may have 4 or 5 meanings, depending on the circumstances or how it is said. Anyway, I like here, right, the life of the body does not count for him, or counts very little in comparison with what is considered as the real life, the real essence of one's own existence expressed in the overruling of all obstacles, in infinite liberty and self-freedom. Freedom is the Sicilian man's main objective, not to be under anyone's yoke, and he achieves this freedom through the only authority he recognizes, the family group known to Sicilians as the Corsica, right? Which is an artichoke or thistle, right? Closely folded leaves symbolize the tight-knit, resistant nature of the family. Once again, it comes down to that. So, anyway, there's the stiletto, right? 5-inch blade. Now, I like these drawings. Okay, and he makes the cut. Dueling, right? Dueling, you're dueling with another guy with the same weapon. In the end, he brings up that defending yourself, there's no rules, and there's a lot more craziness. But essentially, you see fencing stance with the knife, right? And this is the ready position, which is the other side of the coin. Okay, the other school of knife fighting, like you're fighting with a knife. It's usually, but getting back to this with the idea of the duel, you can say, oh, he's just putting fencing and putting it on a blade. It should be a long, I'd rather do this with something a lot longer, something that gives you more reach. But no, he's not adding fencing to a blade. Fencing is Italian. Okay, fencing comes from the Italian peninsula. The French could say otherwise. The British had to adapt it when they weren't allowed to walk around with axes and shields anymore. And this is what you end up, especially in modern times, okay, where you can't carry swords. I like this here too. He talks about, hey Mario. Obviously, you get all the things here. The fencing mask, it must have, I don't know where it was invented. I hope the French didn't invent it, because this is one of the greatest inventions ever made for training. And this shows that I know this guy's not bullshitting. Okay, the fighting with the nail files. I know a lot of Italians talked about that as kids. Okay, and other kids, older kids, they would have little fights with nail files to try to right. And it's really, right. It trains you good. When you're good with the little blade like that, and you can not get hurt too bad. When you got a 5-inch or longer blade, it really reaches out. And of course, the cloak and dagger. This was effective back in the Renaissance days with a rapier, and this is probably one of the biggest things you should be aware of. This is always effective, using the jacket as a weapon. Of course, now he's not in the lead. Right, he's not in the right lead. He's in a kind of almost like a boxing left lead. Okay, because now there's no dueling. What's the old matchbox trick? That was an old thing we used to do. Yeah, you didn't have a gravity knife. You would use the corner of your pocket to open the blade, but the matchbox would have the blade open a little bit. So, yeah, right. And you use whatever the hell you can. So. And this thing, I remember older guys talking about this, getting the magazines, right, the phone books, ripping them and putting them under your thing. This is also a thing in prison. Yeah. And to be frank, other than dueling with a guy over honor, fencing with such a small blade, I wouldn't feel comfortable with it. Metaphorically speaking, I would never ever get into any trouble with anything. This is really more how something like the stiletto would be used, right? Which is right? Hidden, right? And used a much different purpose. You're not doing a guy. It's funny thing. He mentions the magazine thing. You know, roll a magazine. You could knock the fuck out of somebody with a magazine. I've seen it happen. You roll it up, but and then he talks about the mental strategy. I love this part here. He goes, all right, remember the Quattrocchi, eyeball to eyeball. Okay, you look directly in their eyes. You pig. At this moment, you will die. It's like, all right, man. Sorry, but you see that old world mentality. Okay, very different from this lumpen America, concept. But anyway, it's just a funny book, and the anecdotes at the end. I want to real quick. When he talks about back in Sicily, the not the duels, okay, not the first blood duels where they would cover the neck and the wrists, or even the occasional duel to the death. You had the spontaneous fight. The whole idea of a blade, right? People have adrenaline. Okay? People, they don't go down from getting stabbed or cut. A lot of, at least real men do. Some guys, I mean, you can always get lucky, but it talks about like at the feasts. And you see right here too, a 16-year-old boy jumped a local mafioso. They always make it sound like the mafia had all the Italian community in fear. Okay, a lot of young men and working men resented these mafioso guys and would openly tell them stuff to their faces on the street. Okay, you can think of the scene from A Bronx Tale, but they weren't all well liked. Guys who worked thought these guys were getting over by being criminals. Excuse me. So you had these stories, and just horrific stories. Guys pumping out blood and not dying, right? And using a chair, a cafe chair, for protection. That's the old trick right there. But anyway, cool book. And Vito apparently, Vito has written a bunch of books since then, and you can look them up. He made a sequel to this. I think it was more about him growing up in Sicily, with the background of growing up being taught this. Listen, man, imagine your father or your grandfather's teaching you how to fight with a blade. That's how the fucking world should be, right? I'm just kidding, right? Wink, wink, nod, nod. Look, there's a sequel. You can get it on Amazon. Oh, well, I don't know how much it is, but the guy kept doing stuff. I'm sure there's other ways to get it. But what's interesting too is there's something in here, and I'm going to link this to my brother. Incorrect posture. So the whole idea, like you lead with the blade, like a fencer, like you're fencing. Right? And there's the idea that you got the blade and the thing. Well, this is more what you're gonna have, and this is not incorrect. This is just a different method of it. Okay, where you're not dueling with somebody, which is almost never gonna happen. This book. This thing, look how much they're charging for this. I had this. It was like a fucking pamphlet. They had the staples in it. You can see the staples. It wasn't bound, and this is like the opposite of what you just saw. But there's also a legitimate idea of using in this case, he goes knife fighting techniques from Folsom Prison. You keep the blade back. You don't. You only stab. And he makes a point. Here you had a stiletto, okay, which is an actual knife. Here, anything you might have a sharp. You might make a shank out of a toothbrush, or a piece of wood, or a pair of scissors, or a screwdriver, or something. So this was kind of like the opposite. Man, this thing, you looked at this, you felt like you were reading like real forbidden stuff. Now I don't know if this guy was actually in the prison, but it was like the counterpoint to the Sicilian blade. It was just interesting, okay, for informational purposes only, okay, stay at, someone comes after you, run away and call the police and be a good citizen, okay, and of course, I'm going to tell you blade books, the infamous book my big brother James wrote, Logic of Steel, is going to be next, the book that got him in trouble with the martial arts community. Okay, and the expensive knife making community as well. because of the stuff that he found. Okay, people still mention that book, which is funny because that book was going at one point for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. That'll be next. My buddy James's Logic of Steel from 2001.